Okay, Jess, could we move to the opening slide, please? Yeah, hello everyone. Well, as I say, thank you very much for joining us today for this workshop on digital exclusion. It's really great to see so many organisations represented in this session and interested in the topics that we're going to be discussing across the next couple of hours. So first of all, just to begin, some introductions. My name is Dr. Matthew Scott. I'm the Research and Policy Officer with National Energy Action, and lurking in the background of this call providing much needed technical support are the other members of the research and policy team here at NEA. Aside from ourselves, I'm delighted to say that we're also joined today by Dr. Elizabeth Blakelock, who's the Principal Policy Manager in the Energy team at Citizens Advice, and also by Dr. Rose Chard, who is the Consumer Insight Manager at Energy Systems Catapult, who is also joining us as a facilitator today. Now, this is the first time that NEA as a whole, but also us as a team, have put on a virtual workshop like this, and we're very much hoping that all of the technological mishaps that could have happened or that may happen have happened over the last 2 days or will happen tomorrow. So we're hoping that this is going to run as smoothly as can be for a sort of first time round. So a couple of little bits of housekeeping just before we get started properly. The first is that this is hopefully going to be an interactive participatory workshop where the intention really is that we come together to learn from each other's knowledge and experience and to sort of collectively and collaboratively discuss these matters and discuss digital exclusion and some of the principles and solutions that we should be looking at going forward in the work that we all collectively do. What would be fantastic to start with is in the first sort of 10 to 15 minutes as we're getting started, is if everybody could type in the chat, if you're happy to, your name, your role and your organisation, just so that we can all have a sense of who we all are and who's going to be contributing over the next couple of hours. I was on a workshop a few weeks ago where the facilitator asked for name, organisation and your favourite energy joke. We're not going to be doing that today just because I think it would probably fill up the full couple of hours if we actually got into that in detail. So please just name, organisation and your role would be fantastic, just so we all know kind of who's taking part and we can get an idea of who everybody is. You can also use the chat to interact with each other and to interact with us. So if you have any questions to put in the chat, please do so and we'll aim to pick up on those as we go throughout. For the initial lightning presentations, please do keep your videos turned off, but if you feel comfortable doing so in the breakout rooms, we would encourage you to flick those on just to try and ensure that they're open, we can see each other, and we can hopefully make a better discussion if we do so. The second little bit of housekeeping, can we go to the next slide, please? Is just around the format of the workshop, and the workshop is mainly going to be focused around 3 breakout rooms, which will be each chaired and facilitated by myself, Elizabeth and Rose. Each breakout room is going to be focused on discussing 2 or 3 key themes relating to digital exclusion. And to introduce what each of these 3 themes or questions are, Elizabeth, Rose and I are going to be giving short 5-minute lightning presentations on some of the research that we've been doing in this area, and particularly on the links between fuel poverty, digital exclusion and the energy market. Following this, I'm going to give a little bit more of a detailed explanation of how the breakout rooms will work, and we'll then divide up into the rooms for the main part of the workshop. Now, this kind of core bit of the workshop will last approximately 45 minutes, which is sort of 3 15-minute breakout sessions. And after this, we'll have a short break before coming back together for what will be hopefully a broader group discussion around some of the issues that we've been discussing sort of in a more focused way in the breakout rooms just beforehand. We're planning to stop at around 10 to 4, where our Director of Policy and Research at NEA, Peter Smith, will offer just some short reflections and a summary of what we've been discussing and how this may feed into NEA's future policy work in this area over the next few months. And then just before we close, we're aiming to discuss just briefly what the next steps might be in terms of how we keep this conversation moving forwards, and also any other matters that arise that need covered off at the end. And so if we can go to the next slide, without any further ado, I'm delighted to introduce again Dr. Elizabeth Blakelock, who's the Principal Policy Manager at Citizens Advice. Elizabeth, your 5 minutes starts now, as it were. Really looking forward to what you've got to say.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Elizabeth Blakelock, and I'm going to be drawing on insight from commissioned research, our experience supporting consumers over the phone with energy advice, and extensively from the insight from our local citizens advice colleagues. I know many of you are here today. Thank you for all the work that you do. So today I'm going to be speaking about why it's so important that energy firms provide multiple channels to interact with them, the importance of considering digital exclusion at every stage of the customer journey, and the optimum process for baking chocolate chip muffins. I'll start with the energy suppliers. Can I have the next slide, please? Thank you. It's hard to think of a time when it's been so necessary for people to interact with their energy supplier. From citizens advice research, we know that 6 million people are behind on their bills. That's broadly, but it will impact people's ability to specifically respond to their energy supplier's demand for legacy debts, but also in relation to their current challenges around finances. And we also know that a very large number of people are going to experience a billing system migration this year, as legacy challenges around profitability and financial difficulties related to COVID at energy firms have resulted in an increased amount of merger activity and trade sales. But people are really struggling to reach their supplier. Now, many suppliers see digital channels as a way of driving down costs and providing an easy way to get in touch. For some, that's a great customer journey. And when considering customers in vulnerable circumstances, citizens advice research highlighted the importance of this option for people facing mental health challenges who struggle to interact with their providers on the phone. But it's not for everyone. We know that 5.3 million UK adults don't use the internet. 21% of the UK population report that they don't feel they even have one digital skill. And a fifth of adults don't have access to a smartphone. More difficult to articulate in a headline stat are that those with a preference and the skills to interact online, but who don't have access to uncapped data plans. People in data poverty may be entirely willing and able to interact with their energy supplier at the start of the month, but not at the end. Now, I've benefited enormously from NEA's research connecting water poverty and fuel poverty, and I'd encourage all of you here today with a research brief to consider similar work to understand the interaction between fuel poverty and data poverty. Can I have the next slide, please? So we know that those who are confident to interact online and have access to reliable internet may still face barriers and still face digital exclusion because they don't want to interact with their energy supplier online on all topics. Our report, Future-Proof, highlights that the basic updates to account, many people are very happy to interact with their energy supplier online. But customers want to use the phone for urgent issues, and I don't think it will come as a surprise to any of the advice providers here today to hear that when you're negotiating an affordable payment plan, interacting by phone is particularly important. Could I have the next slide, please? On to considering the customer journey. Now, the government's digital exclusion strategy reflects that digital exclusion goes beyond physically being able to access the internet and having digital skills. They call out 4 key factors: access, skills, motivation, and trust. And all of these individual topics will be really important when considering digital exclusion in the energy market. But it's also important to note that they'll vary between these different points of the customer journey that you can see on your screen now. People might be very willing to manage their energy account online with a supplier that they know and trust, but not want to interact financially or to switch online. Even if you're very willing to interact at one point in time, if your trust is impacted by an online scam, you might not want to continue to interact with your energy supplier in that way. So understanding how those 4 factors interact and change over time is incredibly important. And it's immensely important to understand now as the frameworks and policies are introduced to transform the energy market as we transition to a net zero society. Which brings me to the chocolate chip muffins. Now, if you've been baking during lockdown, you might remember if you're making chocolate chip muffins, you have to put the chips in at the beginning. If you forget them by the side, you have to balance them on the top or kind of shove them in right at the end. It's just not going to work. You get a suboptimum muffin and a lot of mess. The same is true of considering inclusive design. I'll move on to my final slide to highlight that if we're not going to consider digital exclusion now, we're going to lock out an enormous amount of people when we're considering a just transition that's inclusive by design. Our Fair Future for All report highlighted that digital exclusion poses a significant barrier to engaging with the new business models that we're relying on to revolutionise the energy market. Common themes across future business models, which we had a chance to discuss at a Future Energy Consumer Workshop earlier on this year, highlighted an enormous reliance on digital tools. This was true across new business models, but were particularly apt when talking about significant innovations that moved us on from legacy products like peer-to-peer energy trading, and where there was a significant need to plan ahead or change behaviour, like dynamic time of use tariffs. We know that these reforms risk excluding groups who are harmed by current market arrangements and create new barriers, which is why I'm looking forward to working with you today to make sure that the new market is one which is inclusive by design. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. It's sort of so much in such a short space of time there. It's really, really great. Can we move on straight away to Dr. Rose Chard, as I said, Consumer Insight Manager at Energy Systems Catapult. Rose, take it away. Your 5 minutes also starts now.
Thanks, Matthew, and thanks, Elizabeth, for that great first presentation. So as Matthew said, my name's Dr. Rose Chard. I'm from the Energy Systems Catapult, and I lead our work on consumer vulnerability and fuel poverty within the Consumer Insight team and across Catapult. So I'm going to talk to you about something a bit different today, which is around some of the opportunities that the changing energy system, that smart energy, could provide for households that are currently digitally excluded, or those that aren't currently connected to digital services, and the benefits that that can bring. Next slide, please. So for a long time, and still at the moment, consumers all buying the same thing. They all buy kilowatt hours. But in the future, the way that people will use and buy energy will be different. They'll need basic different things in order to potentially participate in the energy market. That means keeping warm as well as getting other energy services and getting at a price that they can afford. So as you can see just from this representation, I've just put some of the things here that consumers of the future might need, and you can see that the list is potentially quite long. So consumers in the future could be vulnerable, could be fuel poor for different reasons, such as not having digital skills. But what I'm mainly going to talk to you about for the next couple of minutes is some projects that we've done in the last 12 months that look at the opportunities, the benefits that smart energy could bring to households in fuel poverty and that vulnerable. Next slide, please. So at the Catapult, sorry, can I have the next slide, please? So at the Catapult, we often say that the options for a low carbon transition that are needed will need to be as good as or better than the current ways people can use energy in their home. And here are just some results of a recent piece of research that we did in the winter just gone within our Living Lab homes to understand how fuel poor households or households at risk of fuel poverty might use smart controls to get comfortable. So these were smart controls that allowed them to control the temperature in every room of their house at any time of day on any day of the week. And what we actually found is that people really enjoyed using smart controls to meet their needs in lots of different ways. And these households weren't just trying to cut back their energy consumption at all costs. They were also trying to keep warm, trying to manage their energy to keep comfortable, and at a cost that they felt that they could afford. But households found it difficult to know what the cost of the energy that they were using at any time was. So it was a constant managing that they had to go through. But smart controls and enhanced cost information in the future about how they're using energy in their home could be really helpful for households to decide how much they want to spend. So these households weren't households that were very technologically savvy or particularly interested in gadgets. They were normal households at risk of fuel poverty for a range of reasons, in a range of different tenure types and in a range of different situations. Next slide, please. So the next slide just shows you the range of temperatures that those households that I just talked about chose. So each of these circles or houses is a household, and you can see the ring around the outside is the number of hours that they like to heat their home for over a week. The colour behind the house, the green, is the number of rooms in their house they had heated, and the number underneath the house is the average temperature they had it set to. And you can see all of these households wanted very different things. So some households wanted to heat for a large amount of hours, but only a small amount of the house, but to quite high temperatures. Whereas other houses wanted, other homes wanted quite high temperatures in quite a lot of the house, but for not many hours during the week. And what this helps us do is to understand actually that households want different things from their heating, and not everybody wants the same. And in order to make sure that the smart energy transition brings everybody along and doesn't leave anybody behind, we need to make sure the services and the technologies can provide them with the experience that they want. Next slide, please. So the other research project I'm quickly going to talk to you about that we did the winter just gone was something we called warmth on prescription. So we were trying to test this idea that what could it be like if a GP, for instance, or somebody in the healthcare service could prescribe somebody a warm home like they currently prescribe medicine. So that would mean that a household would be getting the outcome, so a warm home, healthy temperatures, and we use the recommended healthy temperatures there that you can see in the pink box. What if they got that that outcome and they paid a fixed or set cost of energy? That way they would know what their energy bill was going to be, and they knew that they could keep warm in the way that was important to them. Now, this wouldn't be possible without digitalization of the energy system, because we need to know what level of energy and what type of low carbon solutions are needed for different houses to achieve that outcome. But that we see as a really big opportunity for digitalization to provide a better future for households trying to keep warm for health reasons. I'm going to stop there, but I really look forward to speaking with you all in the breakout sessions.
Many thanks indeed, Rose. And the last but not least, I should say, is I'm going to talk for 5 minutes about some of the work that NEA have been doing around digital exclusion, in particular in the context of the work that we've been doing throughout the COVID-19 crisis, and that's what we're going to focus on in these 5 minutes. Next slide, please, Jess. So I want to start with a broad definition of digital exclusion. I always like to start with these things, and I like this definition provided by Mott and Warren, which defines digital exclusion as a situation where a discrete sector of the population suffers significant and possibly indefinite lags in its adoption of ICT through circumstances beyond its immediate control. Now, I like this definition for 3 reasons, which sort of correspond to the bold. The first is that it highlights the digital exclusion impacts on what Warren calls discrete sectors of the population. Research has consistently shown that it's more likely to impact on socioeconomic group DE and others that are structurally disadvantaged in society, such as those that are sort of long-term low income and those that have sort of persistent low levels of educational attainment. Secondly, Warren's definition highlights that it's not just the internet. We often talk about digital exclusion in terms of access or use of the internet, and as I think Rose's presentation highlights a lot better than I could, it's about ICT in its broadest sense, so communications technologies, smart energy technologies, and all of those things that are on the horizon in the energy system. And thirdly and finally, it's caused and made worse by circumstances beyond the immediate control of households. Now, most obviously, this can be infrastructural barriers, such as barriers to high-speed connectivity, access to technologies like computers and smartphones, and of course, affordability. So the ability to afford good broadband or copious mobile data that is still there at the end of the month. And these circumstances can also include things beyond individual control, like basic literacy skills, having a first language other than English, or being partially sighted or deaf. And I think this last element, so particularly encompasses COVID-19 as well. Can I have the next slide, please? And the COVID-19 has evidently been a huge shock outside the control of absolutely anyone. And there's been some research done by some colleagues in Canada, which has tried to identify sort of the main impacts of COVID-19 on digital inequalities in general, so not just relating to the energy system. And they come up with 4. They firstly say that it's through access to technical means, whereby the increased internet traffic associated with more people being at home for longer disproportionately impacts those who are already digitally excluded. So those who already have slower broadband connections or sort of substandard devices, they can't improve them. They can't buy faster broadband as easily as higher income households can. And therefore that gap widens in that way. Secondly, they point to what they call the autonomy of use, whereby households that don't have access to the internet at home are prevented from going to places like libraries or using Wi-Fi in coffee shops due to lockdown and social distancing restrictions, whereas households that have the internet at home or have access to these technologies at home aren't impacted and can sort of carry on throughout a lockdown period. Thirdly, they say what they call social support networks, or what we might call sort of support by family and friends, by other actors, is impacted and is sort of widened by COVID-19 and by lockdown. And so we know from our research that many digitally excluded households rely on sort of friends and family to help them access digital services, to help them apply for certain things online, for example, to go through the benefits system online. But in lockdown, these networks are themselves forced to go online. They're forced to go to places like Zoom and to WhatsApp, which, if you're digitally excluded, if you don't have access to the internet, it becomes a bit of a catch-22, when the only way you have of getting help to do so itself requires internet access. And so that's the third way that they give. And the fourth is sort of the culmination of the prior 3, in that they say, if you're already digitally excluded to some degree, you're going to become even more so due to lockdown, due to COVID-19. Whereas if you're not, if you're comfortable with the internet, if you've already got a wide range of devices, or if you've got good support networks in place, your use will increase and it will sort of not be as detrimentally impacted. And the way that we're interested in this really is sort of applying some of these insights to the energy sector. Can I have the next slide, please? So in our recent research for the Fuel Poverty Monitor, which came out on Monday, we sort of emerged with an overall picture of what sort of lockdown looked like and is continuing to look like for fuel poor and vulnerable households. And it looks something like this. But what we also discovered through that research is that there was numerous issues accessing support for households that were digitally excluded, relating to things like obtaining authority to act, in accessing support services over the phone and over the internet. And really what we want to do in sort of the NEA breakout room of this session, if you like, is to sort of draw on the collective experience and knowledge of everyone in this workshop to try and explore 2 questions. Firstly, sort of how, in what ways have digital excluded households sort of fallen behind or been left behind throughout the COVID-19 pandemic, unable to access the support that they needed during the lockdown because of these very digital inequalities. And secondly, in further local or national lockdowns, what actions could we all be taking, whether it's suppliers, local authorities, or charities such as NEA, what action should we be taking to try and ensure that the necessary support reaches digitally excluded households over the winter or over any future period? So I'm going to leave my own 5 minutes there. Can we move on to the next slide, please, Jess? So I'm now going to introduce the breakout sessions. As I mentioned at the beginning, each of the breakout sessions is going to be structured along 2 key themes or questions that we've sort of posed collectively, Elizabeth, Rose and I, in those quick presentations. In a moment, Jess is going to randomly assign everybody to a breakout room. The main room is being streamed on YouTube, but the other 2 rooms are not. And the way that this is going to work is that instead of everybody moving breakout rooms at the end of the 15 minutes, Elizabeth, Rose and I are going to circulate around the breakout rooms. So you will all stay in the same breakout room that you started in, and you'll stay there for the duration of the 45 minutes. But you'll begin with one of us. After 15 minutes, we'll be rotated out. And then after another 15 minutes, the third facilitator in your room will appear. As well as doing this, we're going to be trying something with a virtual whiteboard. So as well as the facilitator, we're also going to be having an NEA scribe, if you like, sort of lurking in the background, putting post-it notes on a whiteboard. And this whiteboard has been pre-populated with the questions that we're going to be posing, or the themes that we're going to be focusing on in each of the breakout rooms. And the idea behind this is it means that our discussions are recorded in some way through the post-it notes. It means that the ideas that we have and the sort of the suggestions that we come up with don't just get lost to the ether after the session, but it also means that as the whiteboards are circulated with the facilitator, opportunity to see what the previous group has talked about. You get an opportunity to comment on their ideas and to build on their ideas if you wish. And the idea of this is that after the breakout rooms are completed, following the break, each facilitator will feed back with the whiteboard shared on the screen the key themes that have been talked about in each breakout room. And we hope that that will lead more naturally into a wider discussion after that. Now, we do have some ground rules for the breakout rooms, which are on the screen there. I'm just going to quickly run through them. The first is that there's 2 ways to contribute to the sessions. You can either raise your hand or use one of the reactions down, I think at about 5 o'clock on your screen in Zoom to raise your hand, and the facilitator will come to you, or type in the chat in the breakout room. It is up to you which of those 2 you choose to use, and the facilitator will try to work through raised hands and type contributions in order. With regards to your audio, please keep your microphones on mute until you're invited to speak by a facilitator, and please don't unmute your audio and interrupt anyone else when they are speaking. As I said at the beginning, do feel free to turn your screens on as well if you're comfortable doing so, but of course if you're not, just leave it as it is, that's fine. Thirdly, sort of relevance and concision. Because we only have 15 minutes per breakout room, just please try to ensure that your contribution directly addresses either one of the facilitator's questions on the whiteboard or builds on a previous comment made by somebody else. To allow everybody an opportunity to contribute, just please try and keep these contributions concise, and the facilitators will prioritise going to a new contributor over someone who has already contributed. The fourth one, most evident one, please just sort of respect the perspectives of others. We've got a good range of organisations present on this workshop, so please do sort of take on board the perspectives of others. And finally, do not feel obliged to switch your video on if you don't wish to, and you having a script would be useful for this because I've already said that one. But yes, and I should say as well at the bottom there, contributions from children and pets are extremely welcome, so please don't feel that you can't turn your that you can't turn your video on in the breakout room if there's a risk of that happening. I'm going to pause there just for 30 seconds, just to allow anybody to either raise a hand or put in the chat if you have any questions about that or how the breakout rooms will run. Hopefully that's clear, but please sort of put in the chat or raise your hand if it's not. Okay, I'm searching, I can't see any hands. Perfect. Okay. Well, let's get straight into our breakout rooms. Jess, if you're going to do what you're going to do and randomly allocate everybody, and hopefully we'll speak to you all soon.
I'm just watching everybody move into their rooms just at the moment. Elizabeth, 2 moments.
Welcome everyone. It's great to see some familiar faces.
There we go. That should be everybody moved now.
Great.
Helen, you should be able to share your screen.
Just so you know, I can't see everyone on my screen at once, so there will be some scrolling to check for the hands up button. We're just waiting to get the whiteboard up. Fantastic, I can see it on its way. So we've got 15 minutes for our discussion, and since I've posed 3 questions, that makes about 5 minutes per topic. Nice, discrete, small questions, you understand, around the importance of an omni-channel approach, digital exclusion in terms of being inclusive by design, and considering all points on the customer journey. So that's going to be a bit of a challenge. So let's can everyone see the 3 topics there? I can see some nodding. Great. All right, so let's start with the first one. I'm struggling a little bit to read the small type, apologies, which is around the importance of having the opportunity to interact digitally, but also via other channels with your energy supplier in terms of engaging. So would anyone like to start us off? You're waiting for the next topic, maybe. I'll just scroll through. I mean, I'm very flattered that you thought I covered all of it in a 5-minute lighting talk. That's great. Maybe we'll come back to that one. So the next thing was around the challenges around different points in the customer journey. Now I can't put that up for you, but I've got it here. So firstly, knowing that there's an option of a particular product price or a support mechanism. So that might look like knowing that there's a particular grant and then signing up, applying for that. If it's a product, setting it up in your home, thinking of the kind of things that Dr. Chard was talking about, and then actually using it or maintaining your connection to a particular provider. If you did want to switch at any stage, what challenges might that be posed if you're digitally excluded? And then if you do have any problems in terms of getting problems solved and complaining, what challenges around digital exclusion might there be there? All right, I'm going to have to start asking for some contributions directly. So let's start with something that's a particular point in that journey rather than having it so wide. So can I ask someone to either put in the chat or to raise a hand about any challenges in terms of digital exclusion, about having awareness of particular support mechanisms? If you're not online, how would you find out about a support, whether that's a grant or a particular area where you've got some support? Sarah, I can see you've got your hand up there.
Hi, Elizabeth. I have actually been looking at digital exclusion for quite some time while I've been doing energy advice and making notes about it in general. And I would say in Calderdale, I would say about 50% of our clients are digitally excluded. The journey itself, even if they've got a little bit of knowledge, what I find is that the barrier becomes, well, it's straight away, because they may not necessarily be getting the answer they want. So say, for instance, web chat being a perfect example, it's not really understanding what their issue is, because it is a bot. So it repeatedly asks them questions, and it's also about how you put that question to the bot. So there's that one. When they do get through to advisors, and it's not really the fault of the advisor, we all know that, but because many energy companies have furloughed people, there are a limited amount of advisors on the phone, and they cannot discuss with, say, maybe a supervisor or a colleague, information that the clients are asking for. That's something that's certainly become apparent. Also, regarding things like estimated billing, which is happening quite a lot at the moment, because again, in Calderdale, we have a situation, as many areas have, that actually smart meters don't really work. So therefore, there's estimated billing, clients don't know how to read their meters. And so what happens then is the client are in dispute about how much they've used or how much the costs are. Then the energy companies are saying, no, this is how much you owe us, and if you don't pay, then we're going to send that to a debt collection agency, therefore affecting then the client's credit rating. And that is something that we're coming across quite a lot at the moment. It's more to do with estimated billing and the fact that clients can't get that information over via email, etc., and the frustration just gets exacerbated.
Yeah, we're certainly seeing that across the board. It's the intersection between people being concerned about the affordability of their bill and then a challenge around the meter reading. So that's been particularly bad in areas with local lockdown, where there's been an appointment booked or a reader that's due, but then they've unexpectedly had to cancel the appointment. But also this absolutely enormous backlog in the industry of all these jobs that haven't been able to go ahead from a safety perspective, but certainly from a reads perspective as well. And it kind of shifts the responsibility then to the person in their home to say, oh well, it's your job now to provide us with an accurate meter reading. Some people who've never had to take a read in the past. Thinking about that in terms of digital exclusion, I've certainly seen many cases where across the country where the prompt is, could you send us it online, either via the app or by email? And there doesn't seem to be any other channel to then provide the read at all, and that's been a real challenge for people who are just not comfortable being online at all. Really interesting reflection about the access to perhaps things that are less well known in centres when you don't have a floor walker or a manager or a colleague next to you. And I wonder if there's something specific about the new way of working this year, which is kind of providing an additional barrier in terms of people who need extra support, but perhaps one that could benefit if there is more access to a smooth customer journey online. So that's another kind of way in which the gap might be growing between digitally excluded people who've got access to the right team at the right time because they're able to fill in the online form, for example, the gap getting even bigger from them and the people who are using the phone and not getting the support they need. I can see that there is a question in the chat, so I'm just going to flick screens across there. Yeah, good point there from Rebecca. Do you want to come off mute to share that with us?
Yeah, so I was actually in a workshop this morning about Easy Read and with Disability Learning Wales, and how we can make things more accessible for people with disabilities, learning needs or other disabilities such as colourblindness, things like that. And actually a lot of these companies, although they do the tick box exercise, they don't necessarily make the individual adaptations for people that have got learning disabilities or needs. And a lot of the digital solutions that they're coming out with aren't intuitive for those people to use. And if they're not able to access the face-to-face help that they usually get, then how are they going to get the help they need? How are they going to access not just the energy companies, but us as well?
Yeah. So I'm severely dyspraxic and dyslexic, and I have this kind of, I'm surrounded at all times by different overlays for text and different things which I set up online, which are supposed to help me kind of be able to scan through kind of dense text, but they are very rarely useful when it comes to filling in online forms. And there's a lot of quite heavy background systems that help to deliver those. So even if you've got the accessibility of your online and you have a system that's supporting you in terms of screen readers and things, they're really heavy on your connection. I'm in rural Suffolk, and it's been quite a challenge to use any of those tools on my Citizens Advice laptop with my pretty decent broadband connection. So it must be all much more challenging if you're trying to do it on a limited amount of data on your smartphone. And that's even if there is the transparency or the usability that's considered from learning difficulties. So thank you very much for raising that one. going to just pop that down on my piece of paper so I can remember it, even if I can't see the screen up there. Is there anything else that anyone would like to highlight in terms of different points of the customer journey and where digital exclusion might be particularly challenging? Quite relieved, because that was a brilliant foundation to spring into the idea of inclusive design. So that's the idea that you, when you're setting up new systems, new products, and absolutely in terms of the new business models that that we're going to see emerge in the energy market to get us to net zero, how to make sure that everyone's needs are reflected in that world, and that the understanding and knowledge of how people need to interact with energy products and with people who provide those energy products are there right from the beginning. 5 minutes left, that means we're perfectly on time. Excellent. Okay, so we're going to need to nail inclusive design for net zero in 5 minutes. I'd like to start us off. So I've been following the Catapult work quite closely, and I find it really fascinating to read their user experiences in terms of new controls which are set up in terms of being able to interact with your energy. Has anyone else got any insight into kind of attempts to have kind of a new piece of technology that supports that control of energy use, that marries kind of comfort with energy use? All right, 2 hands up. We've got Tom Hargreaves. Would you like to come in?
Yeah, thanks, Elizabeth. Just to say, I mean, so I'm a researcher at the University of East Anglia, and we've done a range of research on kind of people engaging with smart home controls and such like. And one of the kind of common things is that actually introducing these new controls takes a significant amount of time. And actually, it's a very demanding thing to do. So these smart controls, whilst they might provide all sorts of benefits, they aren't a simple kind of fit and forget. It takes a lot of time to learn how to use them. Often the actual labor of using them falls disproportionately within households. And so, you know, there are particular members of the household that have to take on that additional extra work and so on. So just, it's to say that, you know, there needs to be not just inclusive design of the kit itself, but real thought given to how they're installed and how people are kind of engaged with them and given time to learn how to use them and make them work for themselves. So it's a simple thing. This goes beyond the technology and actually thinking very carefully about the installation and the kind of, you know, the user engagement with that technology, I'd say.
Thank you. I can see Sarah's also got her hand up there. Sarah, do you want to pop off mute to talk us through?
Yeah. Sorry, I was just wondering, you know, like how can we get some clients to maybe interact with their energy company? And what the idea I was thinking was almost like something that's handheld. Could the energy company actually start sending something to the client that's handheld that actually directly relates to the energy company they're with or any other energy? And what it is almost like a walkthrough on how to use it, i.e. it's like a digibox or like a mini pad or something, whereby it will, and it says how, you know, how to open it first of all, but how to read your bill, for instance, because you know and I know that most people don't know how to read the bill. They don't even understand what a kilowatt hour is, never mind a unit. So, and what it does is it actually does a step-by-step approach to becoming digital, so that actually then the client is self-teaching, but also the energy company is getting the information they want. And it just a really easy way of doing it. I know it sounds mad, but almost like when you go to a McDonald's board and you can press on a button and it says, you know, I want mac and cheese, or I want, you know, a Coca-Cola, something that's that the client will find it comfortable. It's just a thought, you know what I mean, for the future, maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, certainly that was a lot of the intent around it, and in-home displays, that you would have that much more live interaction, but it's been massively preceded by apps. Now, the feedback we've got from a range of different areas is that the there are still a lot of accessibility challenges with an app that's supposed to accessibly talk you through. And one of the best things that I've seen come through to support some vulnerable people is from energy networks, who will have a FaceTime with someone to actually walk them through how to use a display. We're coming into our last minute, so I can see that there's something else that's popped into the chat. So our last comment before you move to your next group is from back to Rebecca. Oh, and thank you, Astrid, for your comment about smart. But can we just, Rebecca, can I ask you to share that point again?
Yeah, so it's just about focusing on the easy wins, because as with most things the energy companies do, they're targeted, so they want to get the numbers, they want to do the easy wins. And by doing that, if we have some sort of accessibility technology, they're going to focus on the properties that are easy to install, where they've got the network there, where they've got the access, the broadband. And that means that potentially you're going to see this digital exclusion gap widen even more. So yeah, it's just about making sure that we try not to let that happen, and we keep on about the people that are digitally excluded.
Great, thank you. I need to move to my next room, and I will leave you in the hands of your next facilitator.
So, hello everyone, I think I'm just waiting for Matt to join me. I hope he's gone into the correct breakout room, I really do. Here he comes.
Sorry.
Great, everyone. Well, just to remind you that this is, as horrible as it sounds, this is the COVID breakout room. So we're interested really in this one and in two questions. The first is sort of what we did badly, or what went badly, and in what ways were digitally excluded households sort of left behind during the first lockdown. And secondly, what we can do differently going forwards. So in further local or national lockdowns, you know, what solutions could be implemented, and what could we all be doing differently in our own work, but what do we think suppliers, government and other actors could also be doing. So I'm going to invite you to clap or to put in the chat if you'd like to come in, so do feel free to do so. Yes, Sarah.
Hi, sorry, there was all these little things and I keep losing where I am there. Okay, so in what ways were digitally excluded households left behind? Well, the fact that they were digitally excluded, there was all the support networks, whether it's regarding energy or anything, they weren't getting the information because they weren't online, or they weren't able to find the information. Obviously, many organisations have had to readapt. These are the things that you learn as you're going along, certainly. And regarding in further local and national lockdowns, what actions could different organisations, all of us, be taken to ensure that necessary support reaches digitally? So, for instance, one of the things that I have been looking at is that I have obviously enrolled on digital platforms, so whether that's a mental health site or local one or things like that. But I've realised that we need to be approaching these clients where they are most likely to be going. Schools are now back in, so there are schools that have railings outside. We use those railings, we actually use banners, start using things that we did in the old-fashioned way of advertising and marketing. Doctors' surgeries, again, a lot of those have railings outside. Use those railings so that the information is quick to get to the clients straight away about information, who to call, what telephone number. I am saying that rather than encouraging people to go to websites, so that they know then that there is support there. I know that's not going to be ideal for people who may be dyslexic, etc. However, again, word of mouth, if somebody reads a banner, they will be able to tell somebody who may not be able to read it. So that's one of the ways that I'm considering approaching some of our clients.
Thank you, Sarah. I can see in the chat from Ian as well, nearly all organisations refer people to their website as the first port of call, and many people didn't know where else to look for info, and those digitally excluded were left in the dark. Yeah, it's a really good second point there as well, to follow on from that. And I can see from Rowan as well, in addition to Sarah's message, not for everyone, but text messages can be very effective for those with access to phones. And I think that's an interesting point that we see in some of our research as well. Sometimes if you're trying to recruit a household to take part in an interview, sometimes less willing to answer the phone, but if you send a text, you're sometimes more likely to get a response to that. So that's great. Can I invite anybody else to put their hand up or to put in the chat if they'd like to contribute to this? Sarah, I think is your hand still up from previously, or is it a new one? Must be from previous, okay. Okay, well, I'm going to take the liberty then to step in and offer another one. In what ways were digitally excluded households left behind? One of the things that we learned from our research for the Fuel Poverty Monitor was around the Priority Services Register and sort of the likelihood or unlikelihood of digitally excluded households being signed up to that, because one of the points that was made there is how do you actually identify and get digitally excluded households onto the PSR? Can you sort of do things around email address? Can you look at areas that have got low broadband coverage? So that was one of the areas that we picked up on, and we actually had an example of third-party registration onto the PSR, whereby an intermediary could sign somebody up, and then within a few days, that person can then be the one to receive a call or to make a call on that person's behalf. So sort of a problem and a solution that came out of that research. Rowan, I've just been informed that you had your hand up. Would you like to come in?
Hi, yeah, I was just typing in the chat. No, I was just, it's not now related to what we were talking about, but another issue is that people who are not digitally excluded can be much better at also using the channels that would be more accessible to people who are. So, if I've got sort of the internet and I've got all of these different channel choices, I might be using up the time and resource that could be directed better to people who need the help more. So just, is it possible to find ways of prioritizing access to those people?
I wonder if are you aware of any sort of good practice examples you've seen in doing that? Because I think we've heard of a lot of sort of bad examples of that sort of over the past few months. But is there any areas that you or anyone else maybe in this session is aware of that working well?
I'm afraid I'm not. No.
No, it's a difficult one, and it's something that we're not aware of that many good examples of it either. But it's a really valuable point, though. Thank you for coming in and for bringing that up. Is there anybody else who would like to come in and offer a perspective on this one? Potentially, if we move towards more what the solutions might be going forwards into the next few months, particularly over winter.
There's a couple of comments from YouTube on the chat.
So we've got a couple of comments from YouTube then I'll sort of look at and add to this one. A couple of comments saying that it was impossible to get through to companies on the phone, so it was only it was only those who were able to use apps or email who could get any issues resolved. I think is evidently an issue there. If you're unable to access those channels. And we've also got a comment saying, I imagine many people may have used up all of their 3 minutes on hold. So this is again, I think this links to what Elizabeth was saying in her presentation a little bit about sort of data and data poverty, and that if you're using up all of the things that you have, spending 15, 20 minutes on hold to a supplier and it then rings off asking you to top up. It's obviously an issue there. And is there a third one there? Oh, that's the 2. So we're getting a few issues together here. Does anybody else have anything to add to what we've discussed so far?
I think there is another one from Rebecca in the chat from before Jess's comment about YouTube.
Yeah, so I'm just scrolling up to get there now. So for further lockdowns, we're looking at options of working with social services and care agencies to access help for people in need. So yeah, this relates really strongly actually to a comment we had in the last breakout room that we've just left, of linking up all of these different services in better ways, especially over winter, to try and sort of look at particularly hospital discharges as opportunities to identifying households that might need further support with the internet or with accessing the services that they might need. And we've had another comment from Carolina there, which is, I think what works very good is to work collaboratively on partnership with local organisations like food banks, faith groups, mutual aid groups and housing officers who know vulnerable residents, to let them know about the support available and to let them know about energy advice that might be available. So if we can add that one in as well, Matt. I can see you're doing that, that's fab. Social prescribing link work has worked well as well there. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to come in and offer another one now about, I mentioned it in the little presentation at the beginning around authority to act and obtaining consent to advocate for digitally excluded households. We had sort of some feedback for the fuel poverty monitor on organisations helping fuel poor households that initially they would have to be with the person in person at their home to have access to the necessary documentation, to go through sort of all of the sort of the checks that they needed to do, and that were then obviously unable to do that throughout the lockdown period. And so this was highlighted as an issue in that there was lots of different ways that I think intermediaries try to get around this, and we've talked a little bit about sort of three-way calls, so calls being set up between an energy supplier, an intermediary and a customer to try and see if there's an issue that can be resolved there. But this often depends on the customer having access and to minutes to be able to go onto the phone, and also being confident enough to do so and having the capabilities to do so. And sort of we heard other stories from that call for evidence around sort of intermediaries trying to post out forms and then having to wait on those being returned, or sending forms through email, having to wait for those emails to be opened and then for potentially things to be printed out. Which if you can't access these means, if you can't access the internet, or if you've not got access to a printer, it evidently becomes very, very difficult. So that was the other sort of main one that came out of the fuel poverty monitor research that we did. And it links in, we've got a comment from Rebecca saying, I think the energy company staff need to be more aware of what their customers are saying, and that there may be deeper poverty issues which they could signpost to other organisations for help. So again, this is one about sort of energy companies maybe being, better at identifying need, particularly over the phone, and better at sort of having those scripts and having those little cues that they can pick up on, and being able to sort of identify those situations. So firstly, but then secondly, also being aware of the support that might be available in particular locales. As Sarah's just put in the chat, as I said, that knowing what services are available in different localities, and there's a question there of how those networks can be built, and how those local services can be brought to the attention of energy companies and vice versa. So a couple of really good issues there. I wondered, Sarah, do you want to come in on that again? I think it's a really important point that you've added there.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, we certainly do get some energy companies actually referring their clients towards the citizens' advice. And that is predominantly what the energy companies know about the citizens' advice. They don't know the geographic area of the clients. Also, they're not necessarily trained to pick up cues on other poverty issues. And usually by the time the client has got through, if they get through, the frustration is so high, they don't want to discuss anything else other than trying to get their bills down or make a payment plan or whatever it is. I do think actually maybe the energy company staff need to be more aware of those issues, definitely, but maybe how do they address it rather than signposting elsewhere in relation to their energy bills?
Yeah, so what can they do more centrally to to be able to help without just sort of saying, okay, we know where to refer, and what can they build in? It's a really great point to end on. We're coming towards the end of this 15 minutes now, so Matt and I are going to disappear. I'm not sure who you've got coming, but you'll know. So we'll speak to you all in the discussion session quite soon. Thank you.
Sorry, everyone, we're just waiting for your facilitators to come back into the main room, so it'll just be a moment.
Hello, I have made it. You're the final group to experience me not quite knowing how to engage with Zoom very well, so I do apologise for that in advance. Danielle, are you with us? You are. I can see your name.
I am. I might need Jess's tech support. I don't have my share screen function anymore, Jess.
So just bear with us while we get that tech sorted. I hope you've had some good breakout sessions.
I do.
Before we're gonna talk with you about two questions. So one is around what problems, and as if by magic, what problems do people currently live with that smart energy, in whatever form that means to you, has the potential to help with? And the second question is, in what ways could we include people who are currently digitally excluded through digital services, and in ways that would be beneficial to them? So I'll just give you a very quick overview of what we've discussed so far. So on the first question, we discussed a lot about, given the context with COVID, how smart metering and digital engagement or digital options can help support services add vouchers to people's smart meters, and that there has been lots of people seem to have experienced problems trying to do that, whether it be you have to go online in order to redeem the voucher, or even if there's a text only option, there's some operational issues in the background that mean the supplier just can't get the voucher onto the smart meter. So on that as well, another point that was raised was around difficulty changing payment methods and how digital services could make that much easier, allow people to move from standard to prepay, as well as between different options of tariffs, especially moving more into the time of use tariffs in the future, as well as moving between suppliers. Then in the second group, some different points were raised on this question, which was that smart meters in particular, but smart online management of your account could help people that currently can't physically access their prepayment meter, either to see how much money is left on or to top it up. Peter gave us a good one, which was a lot of people using a long stick to measure how much is left in their oil tank or their LPG. So there could be some smart solutions for reading the levels of oil and LPG left in tanks, as well as giving people confidence that they are buying a full tank, that they've got some proof that they've been provided with a full tank. Another big one that came up in various forms was smart energy could help people understand the different pricing at different times in the future, as well as the options for smart tariffs. So we have some examples with time of use tariffs when people have economy 7 at the moment, but the group felt that we would see more of that moving forward. Not gonna, no, one more thing on that one was smart energy services such as House, H-O-U-Z, being able to provide carers with information to check that residents, people that they're looking after, are going about their normal habits and that they're safe and well. And if the energy consumption suggests that that's not the case, that they can check in with them. Briefly on the second question, I realise I've stolen a few points into the first question for the second question. But on the second question, some simple ways that the currently digitally excluded could benefit from being digitally included are around how people are charged for their energy use and access to the best deals. So how can they, could there be a digital exclusion tariff? That means that suppliers don't offer the most expensive rates to those that can't engage online. It could allow people to communicate in other ways than just the telephone for those that being on the phone is difficult for them because of a hearing impairment or because it's just not their personal preference. Reading the notes, I think I've probably covered a lot of this in my intro to the previous one. So enough from me. Let's hear from you, and I can't see who's got a hand up, but does anybody want to kick us off with a comment? I can see a few comments from people that I'll read through if nobody's got something to add. Yep, so self-disconnection issues have come up, Chris has raised, and they were raised in the previous session as well. It's great that some of the most vulnerable people in society are currently managing their bill online by self-disconnecting. And in a previous group, somebody raised that those trying to provide support to people could know more around when people have self-disconnected, which would help referral agencies. And smart online account management as well has the opportunity to help people maintain a level of control over how much they spend and what they're spending it on. Does anybody want to add anything at the moment? Couldn't see hands in the previous group, but people were putting them up. So do dive in if you want to add a comment. Just looking on the chat, some suggestions from Tom. Smart meters and smart thermostats can be a good way of identifying people that are self-disconnecting. And Rebecca, yeah, a build on the fact having a smart measuring device for oil could mean people not only know how much is in the tank, but could budget better and in different ways, which means they might be less likely to disconnect. Great. And Sarah, you said teaching clients to be confident has to be the first step. I think we do have a post-it note on education. Most digital classes relate to using email or Word, but I think what you're saying there is that digital classes could also teach people to be able to manage their energy services online. I mean, I love the sound of my own voice, but has anybody got anything else they'd like to add that we haven't covered so far?
I don't know if I'm allowed to speak, but I've waited to the third room. But I think there's some stuff around the everyday problems around, and I know that there's somebody else in our group who'll sort of chime to this with work they've done, but around trust and emotions and the role that's currently played in sort of accessing things by the telephone, which from past life working in advice, I know can be like a really high pressure for people, having to do that communication in real time, having to respond to quite difficult questions about difficult unknown areas. You know, asking someone about their bill or their use is quite tricky. And I think that actually there are a subset of people who would much prefer and feel less emotionally impacted by smart systems and smart ways of managing their energy. It's not everybody, but there will be a group of people who are positively impacted by not having to use the phone and not having to deal directly with face-to-face with people as well.
Yeah, definitely. Great point, Danielle. Tom, I can see you've got your hand raised. Did you want to add something?
Yeah, I mean, I was going to agree entirely with what Danielle said there. I think she's absolutely right. There's a lot of people who would really struggle to engage in this way. One thing for me, actually, smart energy technologies don't have to keep people online as well. I think there's got to be ways in which we can use smart technologies to connect people face-to-face or connect people outside their local area. One of the things we've found is that people, the advice they do trust is often from their friends or people they do know well or what have you. And actually you could presumably use smart technologies and connected technologies to connect people to better with each other in new ways, to develop new relationships with people that are like them, that they trust, that they want to get on with. And it doesn't have to just be a way of connecting householders with agencies that are often faceless, often, you know, not necessarily as sensitive or interactive as they might like to be. So smart could do good things to get people off digital and offline as well, or connect people in new ways, I think, as well.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. We haven't had that so far, and I think some of the community and peer-to-peer smart stuff could really help with that and do that. We've got 5 minutes left. Has anybody else got something they would like to add? Yeah, Sarah makes a great point on the chat, which is digital technology is one medium of communication, but not the only medium. Somebody at the Catapult, Laura Sands, has a great quote that Amazon have 150,000 segments of consumers that show how many different things people really want, whereas often currently uses 7 for energy consumers. So digital technology is definitely not the only way for everybody. Is anybody else? I can't see any hands up at my end. Shout if I've got that wrong. Paul adds on the chat around more education is needed for people to better manage their energy. Yeah, just assuming smart technology as a solution is missing a bigger puzzle piece. In the previous session, one of the groups mentioned not just technology, but being able to have smart services. So ways to manage, automate their demand, so automate demand side response, for instance, but also just knowing how much energy you're consuming and when, what the costs might be. It isn't just about smart technology as such. Has anybody else got anything they would like to add? The board is looking very full. I just throw a challenge out there then. Does anybody have anything that they think a particular group of households would benefit from digital in a certain way. For instance, we talked about carers in a previous group, and people with health conditions, obviously, is often a group talked about. Is there any other specific groups of people that think could really benefit from digital services? No, that is all good. I still can't see any hands up. Shout if that's not right. So I can't see all the board. So we have covered everything from payment types, smart meters, knowing how much energy you've got within your tank, digital by stealth, digital education being a big one that's also come up, as well as trust and emotions, so helping people engage in the way that's most appropriate for them if they've got a problem. Rebecca added on the chat, most groups could benefit in different ways. The challenge will be making sure it's not a one size fits all. Absolutely. And digital has the potential to do that by helping us understand what consumers, what people do want, and not just treating them as one big group, as well as actually delivering that. I think it's quite an exciting space. Does anybody have anything they want to add in the last few minutes?
I've got one more if I'm allowed to butt in again. I think stuff around when things go wrong. So a lot of billing practices and bills when they go wrong. I know we talk obviously about not having to provide meter readings, and that obviously being the obvious thing that smart meters gets rid of the function needing to do. But I wonder how much time is spent disputing energy bills that have been issued or energy arrears that have been issued incorrectly, and those disputes, how much smart systems and that data capture and that data monitoring. It might not be the householder themselves, but just having that there to work with other organisations. And so specifically thinking around everyday problems, a problem being that the energy bill isn't always right, and that people spend a lot of time and emotional energy trying to deal with that.
Yeah, and we've done work at Catapult that says that in a smart energy system, that's going to be even more important, where devices are working together for a consumer to understand if there's a problem and what the problem is, and to prove that there's a problem, will be a big part of it. Jess also added a comment on the chat, which I think is a really good one, that we often think about people not understanding technology, but there's also the issue of people can't afford the connection. So I'm guessing you're referring to broadband connection, and the Lloyds Banking Group in their digital survey found last year that half of people that aren't currently don't have the internet at home do so because they can't afford the connection. So I think that's a really great one. And Liz mentioned data poverty. I think we might see then people can't afford the connection vary over time if they're using it via a smartphone. Sarah, you said everything will be dependent on their needs, especially those with disabilities and sight and hearing. Yeah, I think those with sight and hearing impairments is another group that could really benefit. How are we doing on time? Lovely NEA people.
I think we've got Peter Smith back in our group, so I think maybe Jess, are people moving back?
Yep. We've moved back.
Fab. Thanks for everybody's comments, and I'll see you in the main room when I don't have to move anywhere, which is good news for everyone concerned.
You're already there, don't go anywhere, Rose.
I'm not, I don't think.
Yes, just saying everyone, we're going to have a short break for 5 minutes and reconvene just after 3:25. So do take a comfort break and we'll speak to you all in 5. Thank you.
Can one of my colleagues give me the nod when you think we're ready to start up again?
Yeah, so it's just unmuting to kick off again then, Peter. Okay, welcome back everyone. I hope that short break was okay. We're going to move straight in with the facilitator feedback. And I know that Elizabeth has to shoot off in a few minutes, so I'm going to invite Elizabeth to go first, to step forward, and to just share some thoughts for 5 minutes about sort of some of the main key points and key themes that came out of that discussion. So Elizabeth, whenever you're ready, do feel free to just go straight in.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you for some absolutely brilliant ideas that have come through in the interactive session there. So firstly, on the importance of having multiple channels, some really cautionary tales that we need to learn from in terms of the warm home discount journey, in terms of accessing schemes and the process for doing that. And also around online tariffs and the fact that they're very there's some significant savings associated with online tariffs can drive people to select them, or friends and family to sign people up for them, even if people aren't comfortable or don't have access to online accounts. In terms of thinking about the importance of considering the whole customer journey, we know that the priority service register can flag really clearly to suppliers and also to networks people's specific needs. Fantastic idea by one of our participants that digital exclusion should be one of the codes that's on the priority service register, so that you can capture people's willingness or ability to engage online. So what does that mean in terms of inclusive design for the future? Well, I've got 3 particular points that came out of our discussion. Firstly, need a free phone number associated with any future products and propositions. There needs to be a paper journey for people who prefer a paper journey, and by no means least, there needs to be a bespoke process to support people who are in rural communities who are off the gas grid. So that's my attempt to summarise those 3 discussions. Thank you so much, everyone, for your participation.
Okay, thank you so much, Elizabeth, for joining us and for facilitating such a great session. I'm going to move on. Rose, would you like to step forward and quickly talk us through 5 minutes of your screen and what you got down on your board?
Great, thanks, Matthew. Yeah, so we covered a great range of things that I'm just going to cover. So we covered lots of things in both questions, but in summary, we found that digital services could help people with allowing remote payment when support services are trying to help people with vouchers for credit on their prepayment meter. It could help people move between different payment types more easily and between tariffs and suppliers more easily. We had lots of tales of operational problems moving between payment types and tariffs. It could help people in their homes simply control their heating, not making it too complicated, but allowing them to get warm in the way that's important to them with the heating systems that they've got. It could help people understand prices of energy, important now for economy 7 rates, but also could be important in the future with smart tariffs and time of use tariffs. It could also help people with sight and hearing impairments and mobility impairments to communicate with their energy supplier more easily, as well as engage with their bills and the cost of the energy. And then the last point that came up was around building a community could be really valuable to people when they're getting advice from family and friends. Smart services could enable them to have more conversations about that and share more experiences around how they're using energy in their home. I think I covered most things. Apologies if I didn't capture your point.
Fab. Thank you so much, Rose. Matt, can you quickly share the final whiteboard from our session? And I will do probably a very, very poor job of summarising everything that was said within that. I'm just going to get there. So we focused on two questions there. In what ways were digitally excluded households left behind and unable to access the support they needed during lockdown, and in further national or local lockdowns, you know, what could we be doing differently? And this sort of covered, you know, a huge amount of different stuff, and I'm going to do my best to try and summarise some of the key themes that cuts across these different post-it notes. I think the first theme was the different communication methods used by customers to access support, whether this was through web chat, whether this was through the telephone. I think we highlighted that there's sort of lots of different pinch points through those communication processes that mean customers who are digitally excluded are more likely to drop off. So we talked a little bit about web chat and sort of the uncertainty of whether you're speaking to a bot or if you're speaking to a person, and the processes that a web chat goes through to triage and to get to and to try and work out what the issue is before passing you on to a person is a difficult one for those who might not be as familiar with the internet or as familiar with those processes. And the same with telephone support, particularly automated attendance and the need to put in different numbers and to sort of listen to different options. And we had a sort of a couple of bits of evidence of, intermediaries support, people who support households sort of saying, you know, we would just hang up, they would just not go any further through that process. And so there's perhaps speaks to a need to simplify those processes a little bit more. I think the second main point we spoke about, particularly with regards to the first question, is around providing additional help to those who are particularly vulnerable and who require it the most, and how doing so remotely through not being able to visit people at home, through not being able to spend time with people to better understand their needs, and sort of forcing that communication to go over to the telephone and to other methods, you know, creates barriers and creates sort of barriers that are very difficult to overcome. One of the things that we discussed in particular was around sort of consent to advocate and the extent to which different suppliers and different organisations were engaging with three-way telephone calls and other methods to get that support, you know, which was sort of having a really detrimental impact in some cases. We talked a little bit about the impact of libraries and other public spaces being closed, and the impact that had on those who needed support during lockdown but would normally go to a library or who would normally go to a cafe to get that support, to use the free Wi-Fi and through using a computer. And we also talked a little bit, fourthly, about the priority services register, and sort of the ability, really, as I think Elizabeth said already, is that can we have a digitally excluded, a digital exclusion or some kind of related code on there to help people who are, and to help people get the help that they need through that register. But also, how can you identify people to get on that register in the first place is a really challenging issue. So in further local or national lockdowns, I think there was a few things that came out, but there's one that was highlighted really strongly across all three groups, and it's a strange one, but I think one that is good to reflect on going forwards, and also in the rest of this session, is that we need to collaborate more, and different organisations need to talk to each other more. We had a couple of examples, one where potentially suppliers or networks sort of having a customer in a local scenario, in a local situation, but not knowing the local groups, more often than not, perhaps going to Citizens Advice or to another national organisation, but without really having the connections in different local areas to really get that support across quickly. But also more generally in trying to link up and communicate across different services like health and social care. And there was some really good discussion around whether we could use sort of hospital admissions a bit more and hospital discharge a bit more, to try and make these kind of identifications of digitally excluded households that might further down the line require further support, particularly over the coming winter period and in future winter periods. And so I've probably very badly summarised what was a lot of really insightful suggestions and conversations, but I think those were the main points that came out of it. And Jess, if we could go back to the slide deck now and to the broader discussion questions. We want to take the discussions that we've been having in the breakout groups and sort of the different topics that we've been talking about, and to look maybe at two broader questions going forward for the work that we collectively do. The first being, what principles should we be placing at the centre of our work to reduce digital inequalities and the ways that they shape access to current and future energy systems and support? And secondly, what solutions should we be advocating to embed these principles across policy and practice at different levels, whether this is government, whether this is across industry with networks or suppliers, but also within the third sector, within organisations like NEA. You know, what do we need to be doing differently in terms of the solutions we should be offering? So to get us started on that, I wonder, Rose, if I could come to you and just say if you have any first thoughts about the principles in particular, if we start with, that we should be placing at the heart of our work, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure, Matthew, thank you. So I was just thinking about the first question, what principles we should be placing at the heart of our work, and the key one for me is the future-proofness of it, for want of a better word or phrase, whatever that is. In that, even myself, I'm guilty of talking about the smart energy future as if one day it's going to arrive, one day it's going to knock on the door and it's suddenly going to be here. Whereas actually, the reality, as we saw in the breakout groups, is that it's just going to evolve fairly gradually to a certain extent. So, for instance, time of use tariffs, we've got economy 7 tariffs. Time of use tariffs, we'll see them more in the market. So I just think it's really important that we don't imagine reducing digital inequalities as if we're just waiting for the new energy future to arrive. We need to start thinking about it now and embedding it in our practices at the moment. So I really like the idea that I think Liz raised around having digital exclusion on the priority services register. And somebody in one of the breakout sessions I was in raised, how about having a digital exclusion tariff as well? So I just think future-proofing it, having future-proof principle would be a great start.
Okay, fantastic, Rose. Thank you. I completely agree that sort of, yeah, having that principle in there right from the beginning of sort of future-proofing, but doing it now and not sort of waiting and thinking sort of the future energy system will sort itself out and it'll be inclusive in some way. Taking those conversations forward right now, I think, yes, it's absolutely really important. I would like to just invite people now to put their hands up if you'd like to come in and offer, first of all, some principles that you feel that we should be embedding. I'm going to do my very best to try and track hands across everyone. So do please put your hand up and I'll hopefully get to you. Or type in the chat, I should say, as well. Okay, I wonder, could I ask Peter to come in and just to offer some maybe more thoughts on this, particularly this first question about principles from your perspective, Peter.
Thanks, Matthew. I think it's really important, whilst I think this is a really valid exercise and we should develop our own principles that sort of stand there specific issue, it's also about reflecting this issue within the broader governance and principle-based regulation framework, things to reflect the digital exclusion within wider vulnerability principles, which are already applied within the retail energy market and across network suppliers. So, you know, I'm not distracting from what we're trying to do now, but I think it's trying to put digital exclusion into that sort of bracket. Yeah, so that was my comment.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you, Peter. And we've had some pop-ups in the chat as well, which I'm just going to go down. So from Sam, we have the principle of choice should be at the fore, not just for digital exclusion, but also accessibility for those with additional needs, such as sensory impairment, dementia or health problems. I think it's a really important point, not least because we would expect, and I think that the research quite often shows that, digital exclusion will often intersect with other vulnerabilities. It will intersect with health issues. It will intersect with geographical vulnerabilities such as rurality. And so having that principle of choice, not just for digital exclusion, but also kind of broadening that out, I agree is really, really important there. We've got a principle from Angela when it comes to those digitally excluded: don't discriminate, accommodate. I think, again, is really important in sort of thinking about what we can do to be as accommodating as possible and broadening our services as much as possible. And Dan, again, I think reflecting that by saying that everyone should receive an equal service regardless of the channel that they use. And I think Sarah sort of saying at the bottom of the chat there as well, in terms of principles, target energy companies, they will encourage digital use because it lowers their costs. Do they need to open town hubs so that clients can discuss locally? Which I think is it's an important suggestion, and I think we need to be mindful really of the, especially looking back over the past few months, that I think we've seen a lot of good practice as well. I think particularly through NEA's call for evidence, we sort of saw that there was a lot of things that suppliers were doing badly, but we also had some really good examples of suppliers kind of going the extra mile, and sort of really thinking about, what they could be doing, and also reflecting on, what they'd not done in the call for evidence, saying, we didn't get it quite right this time in sort of this issue or this issue, but going forwards, we think we can. So some really interesting thoughts coming in there. Do keep them coming in the chat. I'm going to go and have a little scan now of the hands as well, and do encourage everybody keep coming in if you like. I'm going to wait 1 second, Rose, just in case anybody else does and I've missed it. But yes, Rose, do feel free to come back in now.
I also couldn't find how to put my hand up, so I wonder if people are having trouble with that. Another one from me was just to acknowledge the transience of vulnerability, but also the transience of digital engagement. As 20 years ago, you weren't vulnerable if you didn't have access to the internet. And it's likely that in 20 years' time, being digitally included or excluded will look a bit different than it does at the moment. So I think bearing that in mind as well, that people's digital skills can change, both improve and or get easier and be harder for them to engage digitally, as well as the standards that we expect from digital engagement, or the services that people can get if they aren't digitally engaged, will change over time. I'll be quiet to let others.
No, I think it's a really important point there, Rose, and it's related to just what I was thinking about in terms of, and thinking back to the definition that I like to have pinned up sometimes when sort of thinking about these issues, and the one that I had on the slide earlier was about sort of information and communication technologies, and sort of not just the internet, not just the phone. And I think you're absolutely right that what counts as digital exclusion, and particularly that question of excluded from what, and sort of from what technologies, is really going to change a lot sort of over the next particularly 5-10 years. And sometimes we don't think about digital exclusion as including things like a boiler control, or things like a thermostat on a wall, and we don't so much think of those technologies as digital per se, if we ever did. But as these technologies become a little bit smarter, and as they sort of, as they interlink with sort of different things going on in the house, whether that's sort of time of use tariffs, or if it's smart appliances sort of coming on and off, to respond to price signals, I think that question of what is digital exclusion going to be exclusion from within the next sort of 5 to 10 years, is really, really important. I'm looking again for hands, and if it's not working so well, sorry, Rose, is your hand still up?
No, my hand isn't intended to be still up, but I have no idea how to take it down. Sorry.
Okay, see, it's okay. So I'm going to come back to the chat. Maria coming in there to say that smart controls need to have restrictions where people have limited understanding of use or those who have dementia, etc., i.e. if there's changing settings inadvertently when trying to adjust the temperature, which, yeah, sort of builds on that point I was just making there about, you know, these different types of exclusion coming from sort of new technologies and how they may intersect with different health issues and with other sort of vulnerabilities that might make them more difficult to understand. Got a comment saying, do we need pushback against online tariffs? Should they have equivalent cost offline tariffs in there? And I think we're working now towards these kind of solutions. And that, just scrolling up the chat, and there's another comment from Catherine around prepayment energy supply utility opened up a shop hub in Gosport in the south of England for residents. So an example of that locality and that local and regional engagement. And Bristol Energy, Rose is saying, also have a hub there. So I'm going to give one more quick glance around the chat and one more quick glance at people's hands just to see. If you have anything you'd like to add to the conversation, please do write in the chat or put your hand up, and I will come down to them. We've got two final comments just there that I think I'll end this part of the discussion on. So from Melissa, I value every person and the support work services they need, such as that which energy charities provide. We are the support net for the digitally excluded and those excluded in any way. Perhaps energy companies should have to support this work. So there's perhaps a suggestion there that there are existing sort of ways in which energy companies are forced to kind of support this work, and whether it's through the redress scheme or through other schemes. But do we need to expand that? And Sam saying, is there still a fear or distrust by many about smart meters, especially from those who may benefit most from them? So some really good comments there. Do please keep those coming in. I'm going now, if it's okay, to go over to Peter again, who's our Policy and Research Director at NEA, who's going to just offer to close us out 5 minutes of summary and reflections just on what we've talking about throughout the workshop. So Peter, do take it away.
Thanks very much, Matthew. I think it's a huge challenge to try and sum up what has been a hugely valuable discussion, huge amount of insight from not only the people that have presented, and our thanks obviously to Elizabeth and to Rose, as well as your good self, Matthew, for that, but also our attendees. It is quite difficult to summarise all of the things we've heard, but in the short term, we clearly know that we've got a huge amount of work to do to make sure that the pressing challenges associated with digital exclusion are addressed in the immediate context of COVID. And one of the things I've been asked to think about in my closing remarks is what NEA will do, working with others, and to continue to build this discussion. I think in the short term, clearly we want to continue our collaborative work with the people on this call, either Energy Systems, Catapult and Citizens Advice directly, but also all attendees. I'm also aware of the irony of discussing ways in which we can address digital exclusion using a Zoom platform, which has precluded the participation of some folks that would really have a clear insight of the challenges associated with digital exclusion. So getting that sort of bottom-up perspective and lived experience around digital exclusion is something that we can look to build into our research work programme as well. I think we do need to continue to advocate around the need for energy suppliers and other organisations to really up their game and make support much more available to those that are currently without or unable to use the internet, particularly in the context of COVID. I think we also need to make sure that we use the insight from this workshop in particular to put further pressure on BEIS to assist households in relation to opening up access to the Green Homes Grant, which is going to be a voucher which is largely applied for online. However, we're delighted obviously in the session yesterday that they confirmed that there will be support available through a landline, but we can use the outputs of this session to help frame that survey. hopefully make it more comprehensive. I also think we need to hold up a bit of a mirror, as you were saying, in terms of our own operations and challenges to be more inclusive in our work and address digital exclusion, particularly in the context of COVID, where we talked in our breakout about the fact that those people that have been offline won't have had any access really to any promotional material about our conference or our Warm Homes Week, even though either agencies that are working on their behalf or fuel poor households directly might have benefited from the content. So I think that's true of our events and the way we conduct our research, but also how we deliver our support services. And try and accelerate our work on this area as a whole. So some immediate opportunities to sort of make sure that the insight and the information that we've gathered immediately contributes. I think in the medium and longer term, we would certainly like to embed energy and water support within wider local and national digital outreach activities. The current digital outreach strategy was put together, I think, some time ago, and when it's reformed, it would be great to insert a strong theme about access to essential services within it. We also want to make sure that we further our research to understand the depth of the issue and how that might vary. So I often throw out a generic £300 offline premium figure associated with energy consumers not being able to get online to access cheapest tariffs and access the Warm Home Discount Scheme and GoPay Plus, etc. But it'd be good to understand the depth of that issue facing households, different types of households. Detail. I also think that it's important that we look to Ofgem's recent commitment to engage to ensure that DNOs consider a vulnerability in their innovation funding applications and their approach to innovation in general, to make sure that that's much more consistently embedded across different government departments and different parts of Ofgem. And then I think the suggestion, which was really stand out earlier on in our workshop, to build in digital exclusion into the priority services register alongside a new financial vulnerability flag is a great tangible thing that we can all do. But for my part, I've really enjoyed this session. I think a lot of these type of sessions, you're used to hearing quite familiar content and everybody agreeing with each other, and although there's a huge amount of consensus, I think the insight that we've got today has really strengthened my knowledge base around an area that I wasn't that familiar with, and I think it's very compelling to be much more a part of our day-to-day advocacy, and hopefully we can move this from a workshop, as important as it is, to the main plenary when we look to run Warm Homes Week again, or the fuller conference if the current crisis abates. But yeah, final thank you from me, and a big thank you particularly to the team who I think I've done a fantastic job pulling this all together. So I hope that's useful and adds on to your remarks.
Many thanks indeed, Peter, for that summary. And I'm just going to finish by picking up on sort of what happens next. And you've mentioned a little bit about next year's Warm Home Weeks, Peter, but I think more immediately the three things that we want to talk about in terms of what happens immediately is, first, that there was something like 180 applications, if you like, for this workshop, which we had to sort of whittle down in trying to keep it manageable. So I think based off the back of that, we're going to look to do something a little sooner and try to sort of have a bit of a larger session and encourage more to take part in that. So hopefully we'll be able to get that organised within the next few months. I think sort of secondly and more immediately is that we're going to look to share obviously the YouTube recording, but also publish the Miro boards. We're not just going to steal those and run away with those. We're going to look to publish those on NEA's website, and hopefully you'll be able to go and look at them and sort of go through some of the ideas that were discussed in other breakout rooms in a little bit more detail, and also reflect on sort of what was discussed as a whole in those rooms. And I think Elizabeth, Rose and I have agreed sort of to have a little bit of a reflect on this as facilitators, and within the next few weeks, sort of publish some reflections on how this has gone, what we've got out of the session, and also sort of where we see our own work going off the back of this workshop. Whether we do that sort of in written form as a blog or as sort of a video recording, I think is yet to be decided, but we'll certainly take that up within the next couple of weeks. And the third and final thing I wanted to touch on, and it's certainly a case of last but not least, is that it's sort of in any future work that we do, and particularly if we run a future workshop on this, we want to sort of look more at how we can be more inclusive by design in sort of future workshops that we run like this. And that when we put this session together, we sort of went and sort of had conversations with those who we know, and sort of we ended up with a session involving ourselves, Citizens Advice, and Energy Systems Catapult, and we've sort of obviously realised and obviously know and sort of acknowledged that we've ended up with a panel that isn't diverse in a lot of ways, and we do want to sort of acknowledge that and say that sort of what we do in the future, we're looking to embed that sort of a lot more clearly and a lot more centrally from the very beginning, instead of thinking of it as something that comes potentially after that. And on that point, Rose, I know this came from discussions that we were having, so if you have anything, a perspective that you'd like to offer on that, I'd be very welcome to let you come in and have a final thought on that one.
Oh, thanks ever so much, Matthew. No, I think you put it really well. I'm really aware that we try to draw on, we as a sector, a diversity of people experience, especially around offering fuel poverty advice, and shaping the design of the future energy system so that it works for everybody. So if anybody's got any suggestions on how we can make sure that events and the voices that are heard in this space can be more diverse, then I'd really encourage you to either reach out to me, Matthew. I'm sure a lot of people at NEA, as well as myself and Elizabeth, would be really welcome to hear any of your suggestions or thoughts. The door is open, and it's something that we all need to get better on, is including a diversity of people, but it's not an easy thing.
No, it's not, and I echo what Rose has said about, please get in touch with us if you'd like to contribute to how you think we can be better at that and how we can do that better going forwards. Please do get in touch with NEA. Please do tweet us. You can find all of us on Twitter, and we will, as I say, we'll be looking to publish all of the kind of the stuff generated through this workshop within the next few days. So all that's left to say, really, thank you all so much for taking part in this workshop, for pooling your ideas together and for engaging with some of the questions that we've posed. I want to thank particularly the team behind the scenes, particularly Jess, who has sort of managed this and put this whole workshop together, from the technical side, and also to our Miro scribes, and to Peter as well for your contributions and for your summary at the end. And last but not least, thank you so much, Rose, from Energy Systems Catapult, for joining us. And I'm really looking forward to continuing this conversation with you all in the future going forward. So thank you very much, everyone. Hope you have a fantastic rest of the day, and do stick around for the final day of Warm Homes Week tomorrow as well. Thank you.
Thanks.